So what are you doing right now? Where are you? What are you thinking about? What are you distracting yourself with? What are you planning right now? If you're not listening 100% to what I'm saying with complete and utter focus, then this is the right place for you. Mindfulness, what an interesting topic. This is a topic that I have been exploring and playing with over, well, many decades, I guess you could say, in terms of it being a bit of a passion, bit of a journey and something of a curiosity, really, because it is one of those topics that if you ever believe that you are an expert in, then you clearly don't understand the subject and the topic. Mindfulness is absolutely fascinating, but at the same time, sometimes a little bit frustrating because based on the questions I just asked you a few moments ago, we live as human beings. Although we could probably say that we are actually human doings rather than human beings because we're constantly doing things, we're constantly distracted. Think about the world that we live in. It is chaotic, it is noisy, it is hugely distracting. And so when we think about the word mindfulness, which is the topic that we're going to explore in this session, we often kind of feel, well, that's not really attainable. That's not really something I'm going to be able to switch on. And in fact, actually, really, why bother? Because if it gets to a point where you just feel you're not really able to achieve anything or make progress, often we're kind of programmed to think that, well, that's not successful. Therefore, I'm not even going to try because I'm too busy or I'm too distracted or I've got other things or maybe even other measures of the success that we might hopefully exhibit or find in every day. So I'm going to talk to you as we go through this session about some of the things that you can do, some of the things that you can find as resources. And from my journey, a lot of the different kind of elements, modules, perspectives that make up this thing called mindfulness. Now, it has become, in recent years, possibly a little bit of a cliche. And I think a lot of people avoid the word mindfulness because it has a lot of connotations, a lot of baggage that probably doesn't really do it justice. So I'm going to strip that all back and we're going to find out a number of the things that we can explore, experiment with, try, practice, and hopefully build into our positive daily habits. And those things we might term as mindful, things that actually mean that we are focused and present. So is it something like yoga? There's a question. Is yoga mindfulness? Well, yes, it is. Is meditation mindfulness? Yes, it can be if you're doing it correctly, but what is correctly? We'll explore that. Is it being what you might term Zen, being very, very present and in the moment? Well, yes, absolutely. And it's all of these things, but I would also say it's also more. And I want to kind of explore that with you as we go through this session. So yeah, it's yoga, yeah, it's meditation, it's Zen. It's about being in the moment, it's about being focused, it's about being very clear of intention and energy. Energy is a good one. We're going to talk a lot about energy as we go through this. Not necessarily finding energy or having lots of energy, but energy management, energy realization. And when we look at what we might term self-awareness, which is very much a component part of mindfulness, you kind of have to begin to understand yourself and be aware of yourself. And there's another key word, self, because this isn't about everybody else. This isn't about following in the footsteps of others. This is very much, as we'll see, about really kind of becoming one with yourself. So self is going to be a bit of a theme as we go through this. But is it a cliche? Is it something that is almost a little bit too embarrassing now to talk about? Or is it something actually that is a superpower? Well, I would say it's the latter. I would say that mindfulness, if you define it in a way that works for you on your journey, and your journey is different to my journey, is different to everybody's journey who's listening to this, is if you can find out what you mean by being mindful And that doesn't mean that you have a full mind. I think a lot of people misinterpret that and say, oh, my mind has to be full. It has to be full of things, amazing things, so I can manifest the world I want. And, I just need to be thinking incredible stuff and being really positive. That's often a misconception of mindfulness. Mindfulness is not positivity. It might have a small part to play in the mix, but that's not what it is. So let's try and see if we can get a handle on kind of what actually mindfulness is. Now, I've really taken guidance. I guess I've taken counsel. I've explored this. I've kind of been on workshops. I've been on, away days and retreats, and I've read a lot and I've listened a lot. And I've kind of put together my own little definition, if you like, of mindfulness. And I'll explain this to you now, because I think it's good for you to kind of understand the perspective that I'm coming from with my version of mindfulness. And then you can take what you like from it. Some of it might resonate. Other things you might say, oh, Neil, that doesn't really work for me. And that is fine, because as I said at the start, mindfulness is all about self. So my definition of mindfulness is your world is simply your perception of the illusions that arise as a consequence of the choices you make. We're going to need to think about that one. This is my definition of mindfulness. Your world is simply your perception of the illusions that arise as a consequence of the choices you make. So we have choices. Everybody has choices. We all have choices. In fact, our living presence and our everyday is made up of choices. And they're your choices. So choices comes back to self. And everything that arises in your day, in your every moment, is a consequence of the choices that you make. Okay? But this isn't something that's real. Now, this is a really interesting thing, and this is really at the heart of mindfulness, and I always have to add this in when I'm thinking about mindfulness, is that our world, this consequence of the choices that we're making, is our perception of illusions. Think about this just for a moment. If you're looking at something and you're standing on one side of an object, and I'm standing on another side of an object, and we're looking at the same object, you will see something different to the way I see it, because you're not standing in exactly the same position as me. So you might be standing on the other side of it. We might even be standing side by side, but we're still at a different angle. It's the same thing, but our perception of that object is different. Now, of course, if you also think about the perception of color, when I say blue, I see my perception of blue. But when you say blue, you see potentially a very different color. Now, there's no right or wrong about this. There's no better or worse. There just is what is. But every perception that we have is internal to us. Okay, a perception is not of something that's out there. A perception is our interpretation of that something. So it is an illusion. We're not actually experiencing the thing that we touch, the thing that we smell, the thing that we see. We're creating a map inside of ourselves. And this is why I say the word self is so important here to define at the outset. We're creating this map of what we're seeing or feeling or touching or sensing inside ourselves. So it's an illusion. It isn't actually the thing that potentially exists out there. So our whole world, everything that we experience, everything that we hear, the comments and the words that arrive in our ears, and then we interpret them, we analyze them, we translate them, we make sense of them, and then we potentially react to them. Well, they're not our words. They were words that came from somebody else. There's another thing that we're going to explore. But mindfulness is just that precious moment where you think, it's not actually real. That word is not real. It's waves that are coming through the air, resonating with my inner ear and the wondrous little things that happen inside the inner ear to then translate into my brain to create some kind of response. And those responses are mine. I own those responses. And the consequence of those responses could be some choices that I'll make. And then I will then live in those consequences. And so that becomes then my world. So there's a whole bunch of stuff, and I'll use that very generic word, stuff, going on. But the key here, this is my definition of mindfulness, is that the whole world, everything that we encounter, Everything we think, everything we see is simply a perception inside of us that is an illusion that arises as a consequence of the choices we make, the people we spend time with, the thoughts that we trigger, the places that we go, what we're going to have for our next meal, the work that we do to make a living. All of these things are our choices. And so our world is simply our perception of these illusions, because they're not real. They're things, potentially, they're movements of energy. Nothing is solid. Matter is made up more of space than it is of actual things, although our brain translates that solid-looking matter there into being an object. But it's not. It is an illusion inside of us. Now I've blown your mind with that first definition. Let's get into some more slightly more practical things. Now, you can agree or disagree with my definition that your world is simply your perception of the illusions that arise as a consequence of the choices you make. You can agree with that. You can disagree with that. That is how I'm viewing it. And we are all on our own journey. And this is the core, this is the essence of mindfulness, is there is no one thing that is mindfulness, because mindfulness exists within us. Now, think about the word again here, mindfulness. A lot of this is centered around the mind. You know, we are beings who make a lot of decisions. We are beings who think a lot. If we didn't, life would be so much more simple. Life would probably be more intuitive. It would probably flow more. It would probably be a lot more pleasant. But we often get in the way of ourselves. And this is one of the things that mindfulness teaches us, is that when we are thinking of things, we can be thinking things that are positive. We can think things that are neutral. We can think negative thoughts. And the really interesting concept, the first thing I want you to think about here as we go through this, is that all of our choices in the things that we think about are choices. Nobody can force us to think a particular thing. It's our choice to be thinking what we're thinking. Okay, that's important. That is absolutely crucial, in fact, in this whole journey. And those choices can be positive, neutral, or negative. And when we make those choices, there is this incredible thing. There's this symbiosis that happens between us, the mind, the body, the heart, and the soul, the us, this kind of sense of self, of who we are, and the world around us, or the perceived illusion of the world around us. Because if we're thinking positively, this illusion of this world around us reflects back more positive things. If we are quite neutral, we're quite balanced, we just head on through the day, then our day will just kind of meander with us. And if we're super negative, if we're really critical, if we're even nasty or mean, the world will reflect that back on us. There is no distinction between you and the world. And we'll come on to this wholeness, this whole thing about we are all one in a little while. Because again, that's another interesting building block to think about. But at this point, it is about you attracting like for like. This is called the law of attraction. I mean, you may well have come across The Secret, which is probably the most well-known iteration on the planet of this law of attraction. The Secret is a movie in a number of stages. It's apps, it's cards, it's a website. Go to thesecret.tv for more information if this one is intriguing you. But the law of attraction is really fascinating. And you'll know this if you wake in the morning and maybe you're going to be driving on a commute into your place of work. And you know that if you're really wound up, you're angry, you're driving in an aggressive way, that people aren't going to just smile at you. They're not going to let you pass and let you cut in front of them. They will react in the same way that you are putting out your energy. The law of attraction, like attracts like. Similarly, if you decide consciously and in a mindful way that you are going to behave, act, and be a certain way today, so you're going to act with kindness, you're going to be relatively positive, you're going to smile, you're going to give, the world will smile and react positively and give back to you. It isn't rocket science. This is one of the first, we might call them universal laws, the law of attraction. And this is one of the little building blocks or the little pillars that underpins the concept of mindfulness, just being aware. Yes, you can use this, you can manifest stuff. Manifestation is one of the things that is talked about in The Secret a lot. I'm not going to go there today because this is just about being mindful, being aware that this stuff is there happening, whether you like it or not, positive, neutral, or negative. The world will return back to you the mindset, the framework, and the being style that you are in any one moment. And just knowing that is really useful, because then you can control, you can make decisions and choices about certain situations that you might want to influence or that you might want to avoid. It becomes really, really interesting. And this whole thing then it sort of gets wrapped up in this whole idea of the perception really is an illusion, but it's an illusion that you are part of. Okay, so if you are able to accept that you are not a physical body, you are a collection of cells, an energetic presence in this energetic world, this world of created of energy, and that, you know, we'll come on to the whole kind of universal kind of one and sort of, you know, wholeness in a little while. But if you kind of think about this, you can start to really sort of piece together this kind of understanding that actually I am not just one thing. This whole thing about mindfulness begins to introduce the idea that you're a collection of things. You're a collection of kind of energies. You're a body. Well, you identify in this body, in this particular life right here, right now, and you can touch it, you can feel it, you're getting sensations from that body. So yeah, it's there. But of course, it's an illusion, because it's just your perception of the touch and the spiky thing or the heat or the coldness or whatever. These are just perceptions of maybe what's happening outside in the world. And the same with your thoughts. Again, illusions. How many of you, since the start of this particular conversation, have been thinking of other things? Well, I will guarantee that you have not given me your 100% undivided attention. And here we are, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes into this conversation, and already I've lost you. And why is that? Is because we are in constant ebb and flow. I'm doing a very interesting thing right now, which is I'm on the, throughout this year, the Course in Miracles, which was a channeled sort of a journey, if you like, over the period of 365 days by some spiritual teachers, a psychologist and a spiritual teacher, quite a few decades ago now. And this has been basically sort of published by the Foundation for Inner Peace, acim.org, if you're interested. And this thing called A Course in Miracles is literally a daily exercise, a daily journey of self-reflection, of habit building, of self-awareness, but it has one essence really running through it as a theme. And this book has thousands of pages. I kid you not, thousands of pages. It's fundamentally all about that perception is an illusion. But of course, when perception is an illusion, and the mindfulness that we're talking about here in itself doesn't actually exist, then we have a chance to maybe get into more of a flow. And that is something that I really want to talk to you about in a while. And this flow means that you are not in isolation. You know, as human beings, from the minute we're born, we are socially channeled, we are socially programmed to believe that we're special, that we are an individual, that we are, you know, fueled and driven by our ego, our sense of self. When I say ego, I don't mean big egos, you know, inflated egos. I mean just a sense of self. But interestingly, mindfulness, when we get into this flow, when we get into this idea that everything is just a flow of energy, and if we settle our body, if we settle our mind, if we settle our heart, I'll come on to heart in a moment, if we settle all these things down and just settle into the moment quietly and gently, we realize very, very quickly when that chattering monkey mind stops, when we can just settle our breathing, when our body isn't reacting, is just there and present, we start to feel something else happening, and we begin to think about the flow that we're in. So our mind isn't necessarily being switched off when we're being mindful. It's just about channeling in to a moment in time, and that is the present moment. And what we start to realize is that actually there is a certain connection that comes with this whole thing of ego, which is separating me from you and him from her and her from him. This kind of sense of I can identify with me, who I am, starts to melt away, and it doesn't become relevant anymore. We're not clamoring competitively for success. We're not looking to see where we can earn that next dollar. We're not looking to achieve. We're just being in the moment. And there's something really sweet about understanding that being part of this whole, this kind of flow of energy in that moment is greater than the sum of all of us individually. It's called Gestalt theory. You can look up Gestalt theory, Gestalt, Gestalt. It's a really interesting concept when you start to play with this idea that, well, if I am just this illusion, if I am just a load of cells and energy and everything around me it also is, well, actually, then I'm just blending in with this thing. And we could call that one, we could call it the universe, and lots of people call it different things, but it is just this sense of, okay, I'm out of body. And when people say an out of body experience, really what they're just defining is the fact that it is more than just their mind controlling their body to make physical decisions, or at least perceived physical decisions in a real conscious world. And actually what we're doing here is we're starting to become what we might term as, and I love this word because this is a really interesting word, wholesome. Wholesome is one word, and we often think of wholesome. If you look in the dictionary, it is about good health, it's good well-being of mind or spirit. But being wholesome means we're being whole, actually being part of something greater, something bigger, and actually flowing into this thing, whatever it happens to be. And let me just tell you, I'm not there myself right here, right now. I am a physical doing. I'm not a physical being. I'm a physical doing, talking to you. So I'm consciously sharing information. I'm not in that space right now. And yet, when you are in that space, interesting stuff happens. And I'm going to tell you about some of the research that's being done in this very, very interesting moment, this very interesting space where you are neither consciously aware of the surroundings, you're not making decisions, your heart rate is relaxed, your body is in a state of real calm, a sense of being with a wider kind of sense of energy. And when you're in this space, amazing things happen. So this is what I would certainly term as, the wholesome end of mindfulness. And there are a lot of commentators. I'm going to talk to you now about some of the people who are doing some amazing work in this space. On the journey that I'm on, I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to a lot of teachers, if you like, each of whom is also on their own journey. So I think we look at people like this again from an ego, human-centric position and think, oh, they're amazing. They've got these amazing theories and philosophies and all these ideas. And do they? Do they really? This is the human nature of us to go seeking experts, gurus, specialists, people who can teach us, in fact, actually just fix us, because it's far easier, isn't it, just to be fixed. We'll just take this pill or have that jab or just be taught this thing and then we'll be better, then we'll be right. Well, with mindfulness comes a journey. You cannot learn mindfulness. You cannot assume that mindfulness is a binary thing. It's not something you just switch on. It's a lifelong and maybe even beyond life journey of self-awareness, the awareness that you are simply energy in a moment in time, sharing this illusion with this energy that's around you. So we're kind of getting to a more natural definition here. And these are the kinds of things that Eckhart Tolle talks about. Visit eckharttolle.com for a lot of very, very interesting, and in fact, I would say from a human perspective, some really profound thinking on this idea of self-awareness. Eckhart talks a lot about taking that moment in time, not the baggage that you've arrived in that moment in time with. So all the previous memories, the thoughts, the angst, the danger, the anger that you've felt, and some of the love and some of the positive things, is that you're not arriving in this moment now with those things. If you're purely self-aware, you're just in that moment. Eckhart also talks a lot about in that self-aware moment, you're not actually projecting forward as to what might happen. What am I going to be sort of cooking for my meal this evening? Where am I going? Who am I going to be talking to on the phone in the next phone call? It's none of those future things. All those things are illusions. They're all storytelling in this linear time that we believe we're on. And again, there's another conversation for another time. There is no time in the present moment. It is just the present moment. And Eckhart Tolle talks a lot about if you can find that really sweet spot where your body has just stopped just for a moment, your mind has stopped, your heart is not stopped, but it's kind of settled and calm and beating at a gentle resonance. And actually, I'll tell you, the 0.1 hertz is what you want to get it to, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So Eckhart talks about settling into the moment and being very, very present, not with the baggage of the past and not with the illusions and storytelling of the future. To Eckhart, this moment right here, right now, in this present time, and it is a real knife edge, because as soon as you have that first thought about what you're doing next or anything about the future, you're not in the present moment. You're already storytelling into the future. And as soon as you start to think, oh, yes, I just heard that noise. What was that? You're then recalling memories from the past. So you're not in the present moment. So there is this beautiful kind of sweet spot in the present moment that Eckhart talks about, and that is pure self-awareness. So go and look at if self-awareness and moment in time is of interest to you, then that in terms of your mindfulness journey could be a very good step. Somebody else as well, who kind of building on a lot of Eckhart's work, and she does quote him quite a lot, is Caroline Myss, myss.com, who talks a lot about personal archetypes. And this comes on to the point that I was making earlier, that mindfulness for me is not mindfulness for you, is not mindfulness for anybody else. Based on our personal archetypes, the kind of the definition of the preferences that we have, there are infinite numbers of mindfulness styles and techniques and processes. And one of the really interesting things that goes on here when we start to think about archetypes is that what we're doing is we're kind of identifying some of the things that can really serve us and really help us to kind of almost move away from the position of being, a human being, and with all this baggage that we've talked about. Caroline talks a lot about the threads and the tethers of the past. And she also talks a lot about kind of managing energy in the moment and not kind of, having energy vampires who kind of suck the energy from the moment that you're actually in. So these personal archetypes are your personal preferences of the style in which you enter this mindfulness space. So if for you, mindfulness is because you want to be evangelizing all this amazing stuff and this self-awareness, and you want to develop a podcast and you want to talk this through. And if for you, mindfulness is all about sharing and caring, then that is great, because your archetypes will be your preferences, which will be the way that you most naturally resonate with this. But if you're a very introverted person who likes to self-reflect and would much rather define mindfulness as something that involves sitting in a field or on a hillside or in a cave, comfortably with yourself, just becoming more and more self-aware and meditating, that is also fine too. So if archetypes, in terms of finding out your preferences and your style and your way of defining mindfulness, is a really sort of neat way of kind of really understanding some of those early steps of what feels right and what resonates, check out myss.com, myss.com, and look at some of Caroline's work. There's a lot of work there which can really help you and help empower you to be confident and step into your definition of mindfulness. Because as we say, there is more than one, there are an infinite number. And as you start this journey, you're becoming more self-aware. You're taking the time out to self-reflect, to go inward, to maybe try and, allow that chattering mind to kind of release itself and just pause it just for a moment. What you're doing is trying to be kind to yourself. And I use that word trying because for a lot of us, it is trying. Once you get this habit built in and you start to kind of resonate with it, it becomes more natural. But mindfulness is a journey. Mindfulness can be quite hard to do at the outset. So one of the people I often think about when I sort of, begin this, and I think, today I'm really not feeling it. It's not resonating. I've got some tasks to do. I'm just not going to have a mindful day. I think to myself, well, okay, I'm just going to be kind. I'm just going to accept that that is how my mind, my body, and my heart feel today. And so I'm going to show self-empathy. I'm going to notice that that is how I'm feeling. And I'm going to respond in a certain way that allows me the space to do that. And I think we find there are a lot of people who you might talk to who are on a, maybe what you might term a spiritual journey, who I would say are constantly chasing something. And that in itself is quite self-defeating. If you find that you start off on this journey and you can't kind of keep it going in a kind of relentless fashion, you just need to take a break, be kind to yourself. Gary Vaynerchuk talks a lot about empathy, and he talks about empathy starting from within you. To be an empathic leader, to be an empathic person in a relationship, you need to begin with you. And this is the kind of personal impact that mindfulness can bring into the lives of people around you. We start to role model good behaviors. That kind of law of attraction, you will start to find that people around you become people who are respectful of you and your views, and they're curious about the journey that you're on. It's almost that you can't even try to do this in an ivory tower. You cannot really do successful mindfulness in isolation. Now, I'm an introvert. I always would begin there. I would always be self-reflecting internally. Self-awareness to me means an internal introspection of how I'm thinking, what I'm thinking about, and kind of what's going on inside. I'm a profound introvert, so therefore that is where it all begins. But what I also have noticed is when I'm actually practicing some of those behaviors, and I am not perfect. Sonia will tell you that I am absolutely not perfect in that regard. So Sonia is my wife, by the way, for those of you who don't know me too well. She would definitely say that, you really aren't perfect at this at all. So don't even kid yourself that you are. And I know this. But the point is, what I have seen as part of this self-awareness, this self-reflection, is that the more I do this, the more people seem to be curious, seem to want to know more, ask questions, observe how I am in certain situations, and are curious. And of course, if I'm doing this with and making personal impact, but in an authentic, in a really kind and really true way, then this is empathy being shared not only inside me, but also with the world. So for me, this is a really interesting starting point to begin to really understand the impact of mindfulness. So I think we always think that mindfulness is something that we go and do, but it is actually something that we can be. And this really introduces the deeper sort of essence of self-reflection. One of the people I've been following for quite some years now is Sadhguru. If you go to isha.sadhguru.org, you will see the musings, the travels, the learning and the teachings of somebody who is a really, really interesting person who I think a lot of people would describe as a guru, would describe as a mystic, but somebody who is very, very humble and very self-effacing, because what Sadhguru talks about is this real kind of self-awareness that goes really through to the core of you, and describes mindfulness as being that kind of little point right at the center of you that can only be identified and can only be experienced by you. And so there was a little quote actually on Sadhguru's website which says, the word Sadhguru is not a title, it's a description. Sadhguru means uneducated guru. He continues, I am almost 100% spirituality uneducated. I don't know any scriptures. I've not read the Vedas, and I don't bother to read the Bhagavad Gita. I come only from my inner experience. And the only thing I know for sure is this piece of life from its origin to its ultimate. And that is pure self-reflection. Sadhguru has literally spent days upon days upon days in a meditative state. exploring the internal universe, as he describes it. And he also says as well, and this is a really interesting one for those of us who tend to get very distracted when we're trying to be mindful or when we're trying to be a good person. He carries on and says, when pain, misery, or anger happen, it's time to look within you, not around you. And that is an absolutely profound statement. Think about that for a moment as we're starting to really build upon all these sort of building blocks of what mindfulness is. When pain, misery, or anger happen, it's time to look within you, not around you. How often do we find ourselves, blaming others, thinking that others have been the cause of something? Sadhguru says, pain, misery, or anger, it's time to look within you, not around you. Because, as we know with the law of attraction, everything is a reflection of the illusion of what we perceive. So therefore, if we put out good stuff, we should perceive good stuff back. So when pain, misery, or anger happen, it's time to look within ourselves. So for me, this kind of manifests in not just a profound statement like that where you say, whoa, cool, get my head around that. Isn't that interesting? For me, I translate that to being just pause, just think, just reflect. In a moment where I'm triggered, and I have triggers, I'm not going to share precisely what those triggers are with you right at this moment, but there are certain things in life that can trigger me. And when those things happen, I try so hard to remember that in those moments, it's time to look within. It's not time to either point the finger, get cross, get angry, get fearful, get defensive, or respond. It's time to just pause and look within. Why and how did that moment happen? How did I perceive it? And why did I perceive it that way? What could I do about it? Could I reframe it? Should I reframe it? Should I respond? How would I like to respond? These are all questions that are tied in with this concept of mindfulness. So there's no right or wrong. It's just saying, and Sadhguru is very, very clear about this, is that whatever happens, pain, misery, or anger, the three examples he uses, but that self-reflection is the time in those moments to look within you, not at the things that are happening around you. Because remember, those are illusions. That situation didn't actually happen. You perceived it as happened. The perception is within you, so deal with it within you. And you attracted it. You could say, well, I didn't. I was nothing to do with it. Well, you did because you were in that situation. You were close by, and that was a consequence of a previous decision or set of decisions that you made. So we know how this works. So why do we as human beings constantly fall into the same trap? It's because we're not self-reflecting. We're not constantly coaching and constantly just taking those little moments, and they really can be just little moments, just to press the pause button, one breath, one heartbeat even, and just pause, reflect, okay, and then respond. And the response might be zero, but the response also might be something. And that also in itself becomes interesting. So another method of mindfulness is practicing of self-reflection. And when you do this, and when you really do practice this, you find you become quite vulnerable. If you're doing this properly, you become vulnerable. If you're doing this with a kind of a surface level, oh yeah, well, Neil talked about self-awareness and this, that, and the other. I know myself. Yeah, I know how I react in these situations. I don't need to go there and do that. Well, I can tell you, because I've done this too, you're in denial. Okay, now there's a very interesting thing that happens around this point in the journey of mindfulness. And we're all on the journey. I don't do this perfectly, but I'm on the journey too. What happens is this word vulnerability crops up. Now, the owner, the guru of vulnerability right here, right now, Brené Brown. If you go to brenebrown.com, you will find out so much that you never realized you didn't know about vulnerability. A fascinating topic. The concept within mindfulness is the more you can become vulnerable, and you can do this in public, but you can also begin within. Okay, so become vulnerable within. Admit to yourself, own up to those things. Identify that that is not mine, that is the other person's. Identify, I made a bum decision there. Tell yourself, it's okay to be wrong. Admit it. Show that empathy that Gary Vaynerchuk was talking about. Be kind to yourself, but be vulnerable. And by being vulnerable, being open and honest and true, and not always having to be perfect, try and almost put that ego to one side and say, it's okay being me with all my imperfections, all my flaws, all the things that I just didn't get right all that time. And I'm still a work in progress. This is what Brene talks about. And it really is fascinating. When you allow yourself to go there, the really, really interesting thing in mindfulness starts to appear. You almost, as part of this process, start to identify a desire to share this with somebody. Now, I told you a few moments ago that I am one of the world's biggest introverts. I really am. I much prefer keeping things to myself. It is just the way it is. It's my preference. It's my program. I would say it's in my DNA. I don't know. It's kind of the way I am. But as soon as you start to explore and experiment with this concept of vulnerability as part of your mindfulness practice, part of this self-reflection and building up the confidence to take those little moments in time to be present with yourself, you start to open the door on a whole different you. There's a little technique which I'd like to kind of suggest to you, and it was shared to me by a good friend, Claire Kedwood, who's a kinesiologist who I've known for some years, was introduced through Sonia to Claire. And Claire talks about the dinner party technique, where she says, you're not just one thing. You're not just Neil. You are a heart, you are a body, you are a mind, and you are a soul. And if you really want to become vulnerable, if you really want to learn about this mindfulness thing, become self-aware and really properly self-reflect, you've got to think of yourself and observe yourself in these four kind of entities. In fact, invite them to a dinner party. Imagine your heart, your mind, your body, and your soul sat at chairs around a dinner table. They're all about to begin the meal, but they're having a conversation about a topic. You decide the topic, and it might be, a topic that is actually something I might identify as a bit of a weakness. Okay, put that into the dinner table, put that onto the dinner table as the topic that they're going to talk about. And just allow your heart to have a view. Allow your body to respond in a certain way. Allow your mind to start doing its little stories, the way that your mind does. And just let your soul observe what's going on. Now, if these four concepts are kind of quite alien to you, the kind of the idea of a soul, or, having a heart or a body that isn't your mind, well, your mind is in your brain, which is in your body. So it's all one thing. Vulnerability starts when you can identify those things, or just allow those four things to be what they are in their own kind of entities. And then you start to explore some really interesting dynamics. When I first encountered this, I would say that my mindfulness techniques, my mindfulness practice went to a whole new level by using the dinner party technique. Thank you again, Claire. It was so profound, because what I realized was that through all these years, I had never given my heart an opportunity to speak. So my heart didn't have a voice in my decision-making, in my everyday life. That doesn't mean I'm heartless. I actually feel I'm quite a kind, quite a nice person. I've got good intentions. But those things were coming from my mind, and my body and my mind were in cahoots, almost making my heart kind of shiver away in the corner there, sort of, I can't have a view. As soon as I realized that, and I've self-coached, and Sonia and I have talked a lot about this over the last sort of few years, as we've been kind of sort of bringing my heart to the dinner table, vulnerability can come through. Now, for you, it will be probably a very different mix. But have a little play with that concept. If you were to listen to your heart, what would your heart say to your body? What would your body say to your mind? And a really interesting thing begins to develop as you go through this, is that you start to realize with all of these things that you do need to give yourself space. One of the great meditators of our time, and if you've never been through a guided meditation with Deepak, then it's a thing I would certainly recommend that you do. Deepak Chopra, if you've not come across chopra.com, lots of guided meditations and courses and programs there with Deepak. Now, not everybody believes in Deepak and the ways that he does it, and feels, maybe he's a little bit commercial. It is very polished, I will admit. But some of the more profound work that Deepak has done, some of the research that he's done in terms of meditative states that allow that dinner party to happen, that allow you to be vulnerable, that allow you to sit in that present moment, that moment of self-awareness where you become really aware of your core essence, the Sadhguru moment there that we were talking about. Somebody like Deepak can take you on that guided journey. Now, when I talk about meditation, I have a bit of a thing here with this word meditation. I'll use that because it's easy to communicate that with you. But I always think that guided meditation, that this idea that somebody can talk to you, almost kind of hypnotize you to go to a place in your head, in your mind, and sort of picture this kind of storytelling and stuff. To me, that's not meditation. That is progressive relaxation techniques that allow you to center and settle. To me, the meditation begins beyond that point, when you just settle on that little knife edge, that little kind of precipice of the present moment. And so you're not listening to the story. You don't see things in your mind. You're not aware of sounds around you. You just are. So Deepak will talk a lot about that if you go and look at chopra.com. But it is, for me, a very, very different thing. I think a lot of people use this word meditation as part of mindfulness and assume that that is the end game. You know, picturing this thing in your mind's eye and then, okay, I meditate, so therefore I'm mindful. The meditation piece is just your journey to get you to the point of self-awareness. Okay. And when the mind moves into a different state, be it theta, certain brainwave state, where actually you're not consciously thinking, you're just there in that moment, then that is when mindfulness and where vulnerability and where self-awareness and where that empathy for yourself can really start to take effect. And what this really is talking about is actually working in that moment. And I've done a lot of work over the years on the concept of ikigai, which is a Japanese philosophy, which is, again, part of my mindfulness practice. And a lot of people kind of use the Western approach of ikigai, which I have to admit has been very, very useful for me, identifying that sweet spot in your world where you're doing things that you're good at, that the world needs, that you can be rewarded for, that you actually love, and finding those little sweet spots of things there that just resonate, and then living your life by that. But somebody like Nick Kemp, who is the founder of Ikigai Tribe, actually says that Ikigai as a concept, and a lot more people are becoming aware of Ikigai now, as a concept actually is missing the point, because the Japanese value of Ikigai is that it is a philosophy that allows you to do, yes, all of those things, you know, the great stuff that you love doing that adds value, is authentic and true, but actually doing it moment by moment. So not pursuing a life that is kind of constantly chasing and that is kind of constantly trying to serve others or just do stuff for everybody else, but actually allowing yourself the moment to just look at that little flower on that plant, or to just take a moment in time and just watch the little fly just flying gently across your vision. Those little moments, to Nick, and Nick would describe this in a lot more detail if you visit Ikigai Tribe, he talks about this being mindfulness. It is the appreciation moment by moment of your everyday life. And of course, once we open up this opportunity to practice this, both in a meditative state, if we go down the Deepak route, but also in this kind of moment-to-moment of waking life, this conscious awareness of mindfulness, using an approach like Ikigai, we start to then almost see opportunities within our world in a very different way. And a lot of these things kind of come from some really quite deep and profound, sort of both religious but also mystic traditions. I mean, Sikhism, for example, a lot of the values of Sikhism, things around kind of truth and truthful living, being authentic, compassionate and patient, being content with that little moment of just stopping and watching that flower. This is mindfulness. You know, having humility, love and self-control, just being, not doing. Remember that thing I said right at the start of this talk, which was about, you know, a lot of us are human beings, but we're actually human doings. This is about being human beings and having the wisdom and courage that this is a good thing to do and a good thing to be. Because if you think about this moment of self-reflection, this moment of being present opens up an opportunity to make potentially better choices if you then allow calmly and serenely your mind to join in that dinner party. It also allows you to listen to your heart intelligence. I'll come on to that in just a moment. Your heart intelligence. Often we listen to our mind, but mindfulness could also be heartfulness, because we're trying to integrate here our body, our mind, our heart, and our soul into one thing that gives us the courage to lead maybe a little more authentic a life, maybe a life of, better value, a life of, more compassion, a life of more kindness. And let's face it, if this is where mindfulness takes us, we as a humanity need to get there. And not just as a humanity, we need this for ourselves. A lot of what we might term dis-ease, okay, we hear that word a lot, don't we? Louise Hay was there's almost the founder of spreading or splitting this word dis-ease into two words, dis-ease. And of course, any dis-ease or malfunctioning of the body that we are born with, or the body that we're given as we choose to enter into this life, that dis-ease is simply, according to Louise Hay, go to louisehay.com for loads more about this topic. This is part of mindfulness because it integrates our bodily presence with the thoughts, with our heart, and this soul purpose, this ikigai that we've been talking about. And when dis-ease happens, or our body reacts, and of course, as we know, bodies can get huge amounts of dis-ease and really unserving to the life goal that we have, or the life purpose that we're trying to live our life by. When dis-ease happens, it is simply, according to Louise Hay, it is simply a misalignment, a misbalancing of our body, our heart, and our mind. But if we're mindful, if we're being very heart-driven, if we're kind of listening closely to what's going on and also listening to our body in equal measure, this is why I love that dinner party scenario, because it's so interesting to be able to kind of then think, oh yes, maybe all of that stress has triggered off a stress reaction. I can feel it in my heart. I can feel my heart rate increasing. My breathing's all gone because I'm stressed. Well, that is a minor form of dis-ease. And of course, in prolonged periods of time, that can trigger off what we might term illness. But that is all we're talking about here. And mindfulness can allow you to kind of explore, arguably to fix, and there's a lot of commentators who say it can also fix dis-ease, but it allows you to explore, become more self-aware of actually what's going on. So the next time you're in a so-called stressful situation, well, you're not, you're actually in a situation, you're perceiving it as stressful, you're deciding there's stress involved here, but of course it's your perception of an illusion. This is mindfulness. So if we can keep at ease, if we can keep balanced, if we can keep in these moments that we're talking about, there is a chance, and it is a good chance, that we will not see that dis-ease. Now, there's a lot of research, a huge amount of research around this all around the world. One of the organizations that I've been watching for some time, and it was thanks really to Greg Braden, who's one of the great commentators and storytellers in this whole heart coherence space. And it was actually Sonia introduced me to the Heart Math Institute, who are doing some incredible research and amazing work on the whole point of heart coherence, so that when we start listening to our heart, start really listening to how our body responds, not just storytelling ourselves, but really kind of going inward into this point inside ourselves where we can truly listen and be vulnerable to what's going on. Well, the Heart Math Institute are doing a lot of work in terms of actually heart coherence and saying, look, if you can do this stuff, if you can go inwards, if you can actually properly align and adjust and be kind, and it is about kindness and love is at the core of all of this. If you can be kind with your heart and you can align your heart so it resonates at 0.1 hertz, well, magic happens at that point. And the reason that magic happens at that point is because 0.1 hertz is the resonance of planet Earth. So planet Earth has a heartbeat. There's research, scientific research, that has proven that the planet Earth resonates at 0.1 hertz. And the whole idea of the Heart Math Institute is to encourage people all around the world to resonate at the same frequency. And when we do, we start to build this whole thing about being one. This whole idea that, yes, we're a physical body, but we're also a heart. We're also a mind. We make choices to do these things and allow our hearts to give the hearts the space that they need to become part of this mix. So when we talk about mindfulness, we really should have talked about heartfulness. But if I titled this particular talk Heartfulness, you probably wouldn't have understood, because it's not yet truly a thing, but it is part of this mindfulness journey. So have a look at gregbraden.com and Heart Math Institute if that sounds something that could be of interest in the mix that you have. And this is just incredible stuff. We're touching the tip of the iceberg here. One of Greg Braden's very, very good friends, Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, says that the moment you change your perception is the moment you rewrite the chemistry of your body. The moment you change your perception is the moment you rewrite the chemistry of your body. Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, Greg Braden, and others are huge advocates of this thing called epigenetics. I don't have the time today to talk to you about this, but the concept of epigenetics, and you'll find more on brucelipton.com, is the whole idea that this dinner party really is a thing. This whole idea of being able to control your mind to a point where your heart is part of the equation that can allow your body to heal. That disease can be reprogrammed. And in fact, epigenetics suggests that you can reprogram your DNA. And there's research and scientific evidence now that shows that no matter what you believe you were born with, you can actually reprogram right here, right now. And it doesn't take months or years to do it. Check out brucelipton.com, because you will be amazed that once you enter into this little journey, there are things you can do almost instantly to reprogram, reset, retune, and readdress that dis-ease that may already be there. What is not to like about this concept of mindfulness? Can you see how many different ways, how many different angles, how many different perspectives you can take on this? Well, somebody who has been doing this for decades and is really kind of understanding how this kind of comes together is Dandapani. Go to dandapani.org. If the piecing together of all these pieces of the jigsaw, this idea of trying to see the bigger picture in mindfulness, Dandapani, Buddhist monk who has talked a lot about energy management and focus. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, there is a lot of stuff that you could and should probably be looking at here. Dandapani is a very, very good entry point into mindfulness. And the reason I would say Dandapani is that entry point, because Dandapani's work and the way that he worked with his guru, with his core teachers over the years, has been this point of centering, this point of focus, and using that point of focus to manage the finite energy reserves that we have every day. And Dandapani has some great techniques. He has some great programs and courses that allow you to kind of align yourself every day with really good practice and build the kinds of habits that are going to enable you to begin to live a life that is probably more self-aware, gives you more conscious choices, is a lot more heart-driven and heart-led, and ultimately comes really kind of full circle into providing, as we say, because of the law of attraction, you will start to attract the things that, would have come out of the Buddha's Dharma, wisdom, kindness, patience, generosity, compassion, and actually then be living and operating in a world and a life that actually is much more pleasant and pleasurable. I have to say, the alignment of things that in my life I've seen a correlation between the amount of mindfulness I practice, the amount of mindfulness time I devote to myself, the amount of time I allow myself to be present, with then what happens on the other side in the way that the world reacts to me. I would say it's profound, the amount of correlations. So the question is, why don't we do more of it? And I'm looking in the mirror as I say that question, because we really could and really, really should. And as we do this, a lot of us will fall foul of being human. A lot of the pre-programming that we've had, a lot of the time that we've spent, kind of learning bad habits, things that really don't serve us or the world or the people around us. There's a lovely quote from Bernard Meltzer, the radio host from many decades ago, who came up with this mantra, which I think actually was originated back by somebody like Aristotle. I think this is a really ancient one, but it was brought into modern times, practicing a real kind of sort of Buddhist kind of mantra, if you like, is that every time you feel you want to respond in a way that doesn't really serve your mindfulness journey, ask yourself the question in your response, in your comments, in your interactions with others. Ask yourself the question, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If the answer is yes to all three things, good decision, good choice, good comment. But if you say no to one of those three things, keep it to yourself. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Simple mantra, but really at the heart of everything that we're trying to achieve here on our mindfulness journey. And as I've said, not everything will resonate with you, but to me, that is something that if we could all practice that in this world, it would be a much kinder, much better place. And a lot of this is kind of wrapped up in something that Dr. Wayne Dyer coined as really his, in his lifetime was really his calling. And this was, if you go to drwaynedyer.com, you'll see a lot more around this topic of gratitude. If there is one thing I'd like to kind of leave you with as you go through the rest of your day, and hopefully this is the start of your mindfulness journey or you're kind of on the journey like I am, this is something really to remember all the time. Whichever elements, whichever building blocks, whichever little pieces of the jigsaw you decide to put into play here in your mindfulness journey, if you practice gratitude, then you will find a much better place at every single step. The quote that I've got for you here from Wayne Dyer is that if you practice maintaining your composure and remember that someone else's behavior belongs to that person and cannot upset you unless you allow it to do so, then you will not become an unwilling target. It has to start from us. If we want to be living in a good world, the good world needs to start from within us. This is mindfulness. If we want to see and manifest a great situation around us, if we want to manifest, abundance and joy and love, that's where we need to start. So gratitude for what we already have, and then managing the energy, managing the mindfulness, giving ourselves the time and the presence to self-reflect and go inside and figure out where inside this stuff is happening, so that we can stay balanced, so that we can stay at ease rather than diseased. This is the way to do it. So if there's one thing that you take away from this, it is just about being grateful for being alive, grateful for being here, having listened to this, grateful for the next thing that you're going to do in your day, grateful for the next person you're going to talk to. This is what mindfulness is. It's a choice of techniques. It's a choice of people you can follow and learn from, but we're all on this journey. And how far we choose to go is down to us. All of this is going to be a choice. All of this is going to be step by step. And all of this is going to be the consequence of the illusion of the perceptions that we have of whatever choices we make. And if you can say that and still be in tune with what we're doing, then well done, because I nearly lost it on that one. Two final resources I'd just like to share with you, and thank you so much for coming on this little journey of mindfulness with me today. Two resources. If you're interested in the Ikigai concept, go to moments.com/video/courses/4161. That's moments.com/video/courses/4161. There's an Ikigai course there, which will help you to identify your Ikigai, that thing that you love, that resonates with you, that you're good at and that the world needs and you can be rewarded for, that sweet spot in the middle that could become a core focus for your mindful living. And if you're listening to all of this and you're thinking, yeah, but Neil, you haven't got the baggage that I've got. You haven't lived the life that I've lived. You haven't got the challenges going forward that I think I've got. Then I would love to invite you to a course that Sonia and I put together called Back to Your Roots. You can find that at neya.thinkific.com. And that course is called Back to Your Roots because it's all about self-awareness and identifying and working with all of the barriers, all of the excuses, all of the reasons why we don't go on a journey like this. Or if you're on your journey, hopefully starting to free some of those tethers that are holding you back. So that course is called Back to Your Roots, nia.thinkific.com.